On a sun-scorched range tucked away from prying eyes, Emily Carter adjusted her LOW Whisper HD spotting scope with ruthless grace. The California desert stretched endlessly beyond the Naval Special Warfare Training Center, its heat waves dancing like malevolent spirits over distant targets. Surrounded by towering, swaggering SEAL candidates, the youngest barely out of boot camp, Emily moved silently among them like a wraith. They sneered at her presence, dismissing her as nothing more than grandma counting magazines. Before continuing this story, please comment below with your city or country where you're watching from. Your feedback inspires us to do better. Little did they know that Emily Carter, Chief Warrant Officer 5, was a legend wrapped in bureaucratic invisibility, the architect of the very trial they were about to fail before it began. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the firing line as Jake Morgan, the class's self-appointed alpha male, strutted between the weapon stations. At 28, Morgan embodied everything the Navy marketed in its recruitment videos: chiseled jaw, broad shoulders, and the kind of confidence that came from never having his worldview seriously challenged. "Hey, Grandma," Morgan's voice cut through the desert air with calculated sarcasm. "Want to hold the spotter scope? Try not to drop it with those shaky hands." His acolytes, a collection of younger SEALs, who'd pledged their loyalty to his charisma, erupted in predictable laughter. They formed a wall of indifference around Emily, talking over and around her as if she were a piece of equipment that happened to be inconveniently placed. Emily's response was ice under the desert sun. She didn't flinch, didn't react with the anger they expected. Instead, she adjusted her stance with mechanical precision, every movement economical and purposeful. "Careful, son," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of experience that no amount of bravado could match. The desert has a way of humbling those who mistake noise for strength. Master Sergeant Mike Lawson watched from the observation tower, his weathered face creased with concern. At 54, Lawson had seen 4 decades of war, and his instincts were screaming warnings. The way Emily held herself, the perfect balance, the subtle awareness of her surroundings, the calm that came from staring death in the face and walking away. These weren't the traits of an administrative officer. "Jesus Christ," he muttered to himself, recognizing the predator's poise beneath her unassuming exterior. They have no idea what they're dealing with. Morgan continued his performance, projecting his voice so the entire group could hear his lesson in masculine superiority. He gestured toward the complex target array downrange, a simulated village bristling with hidden threats at distances ranging from 800 to 2,400 meters. "This isn't something you learn from a book, ma'am," he said, the honorific dripping with condescension. "This takes talent, instinct, real combat experience." His followers nodded in fervent agreement, their loyalty pledged to his swagger. They created an impenetrable bubble of arrogance, isolating Emily more effectively than any direct insult could have accomplished. But Emily Carter wasn't in their world. She existed in a space defined by calculation and deadly precision, where wind patterns spoke louder than bragging rights and patience conquered ego every single time. She ignored the posturing, focusing instead on reading the environment with senses honed through decades of survival. The subtle shifts in air pressure against her skin, the way distant vegetation bent in response to thermal currents, the behavior of heat mirages as they warped the target images. For all his technical knowledge, Morgan was still dependent on his equipment, still a prisoner of numbers and digital readouts. Emily had transcended those limitations long ago, 25 years earlier, the Montana wilderness. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in 8-year-old Emily's small hands, but her father's voice remained patient and steady. "Shooting isn't about strength, sweetheart," Colonel William Carter said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid mountain air. "It's about finding the space between heartbeats. That's where the shot lives." William Carter was a ghost in certain circles, a man whose name appeared in classified files that officially didn't exist. During the Cold War, he'd been one of America's premier long-range specialists, with confirmed eliminations across 3 continents. But to Emily, he was simply Dad, the man who demanded excellence in all things while teaching her that true power came from discipline, not dominance. On the makeshift range behind their Montana ranch, he'd set up steel targets at varying distances. The farthest, positioned at exactly 1,000 yards, seemed impossible for a child with a .22 rifle. "The wind doesn't care how old you are," William instructed, his hands steady on her shoulders. "Math doesn't care if you're a boy or a girl. Learn to read what others can't see, and you'll never miss what matters." By age 12, Emily could consistently hit targets at 600 yards. By 14, she'd developed an almost supernatural sensitivity to environmental conditions that would later make her legendary in covert operations. Their house was a shrine to military heritage. 3 generations of service displayed on walls lined with commendations, photographs, and weapons that told stories of valor in places that didn't appear on any map. "Remember this," William often repeated, his mantra forming the core of his philosophy. "The rifle is just a tool. The shooter is the weapon." After Emily's mother died when she was 6, cancer, swift and merciless, the bond between father and daughter grew unusually intense. William raised her not just as a child, but as an heir to a legacy of service and sacrifice. "There will come a time," he told her on her 16th birthday, "when someone will underestimate you because you're a woman. That's when you'll have the advantage. Never correct their mistake until you're looking through your scope." Present-day California desert. The memory faded as Emily returned her attention to the young SEALs surrounding her. They had no idea they were in the presence of someone who'd spent 3 decades perfecting skills they could barely comprehend. "Master Sergeant Lawson," came a voice from behind them. Colonel Marcus Steele approached with the measured gait of command authority, his silver hair gleaming in the harsh sunlight. Lawson straightened unconsciously. "Sir?" "I understand we have a distinguished observer on the range today," Steele said, his eyes finding Emily among the crowd of candidates. "Chief Warrant Officer Carter, isn't it?" Morgan's expression shifted from arrogance to confusion. A Chief Warrant Officer 5 was the highest technical rank in the military, reserved for specialists with extraordinary expertise. It was a designation that commanded respect from officers and enlisted personnel alike. "Sir, we're in the middle of a training evolution," Morgan protested, clearly uncomfortable with the attention being diverted from his performance. Steele ignored him completely, focusing instead on Emily with the recognition of one professional acknowledging another. "Chief Carter," he said formally, "I believe you have some familiarity with advanced marksmanship techniques." "Some experience, Colonel," Emily replied diplomatically, though her eyes carried depths of knowledge that made Lawson's stomach tighten. "With anticipation. If I'm not mistaken," Steele continued, "you served with Joint Special Operations Command's Task Force 88 in Afghanistan?" The silence that fell over the group was deafening. Task Force 88 was a classified unit whose very existence was officially denied. Its operations were the stuff of whispered legends in special operations communities. Morgan's face went through a complex series of expressions: disbelief, recognition, and the first stirrings of genuine fear. "That was a long time ago, sir," Emily said quietly. "Not that long ago, Chief. And if memory serves, you were instrumental in developing the training protocols we still use today." Steele gestured toward the complex target array downrange. "Perhaps you'd be willing to demonstrate some of those techniques?" "For educational purposes, of course." The invitation hung in the desert air like a challenge that couldn't be declined. Emily looked at the smirking faces around her, seeing not just arrogance but the dangerous confidence of people who'd never been truly tested. These young warriors would face real enemies soon enough. Enemies who wouldn't be impressed by swagger or intimidated by reputation. "I'd be happy to assist with the training, Colonel," she said, moving toward her equipment case with fluid precision. What she withdrew wasn't the state-of-the-art carbon fiber system the SEALs had been using. Instead, she assembled an aging M110 semi-automatic sniper system, a weapon many of them considered obsolete, a relic from an earlier era of warfare. But in Emily's hands, the old rifle transformed into something timeless and deadly. Each component found its place with the certainty of muscle memory developed over thousands of repetitions. The weapon came together not as separate parts, but as a unified extension of her will. She didn't consult the sophisticated wind meters the SEALs had been obsessing over. She didn't need technology to tell her what her body could sense directly. She plucked a single blade of dry grass, held it up, and watched it fall. A primitive but effective method for reading local air currents. But even this was just confirmation of what she already knew from feeling the air against her skin and observing the subtle movements of vegetation across the range. Morgan crossed his arms, a smirk fixed on his face as he eagerly anticipated the public failure that would validate his entire worldview. The other SEALs exchanged skeptical glances. The wind was howling across the range in unpredictable gusts, making precision shooting a nightmare. Emily settled behind the rifle, her body conforming to the earth beneath her, eliminating any separation between herself, her weapon, and the environment. She became utterly still, her breathing slowing to an almost imperceptible rhythm. She didn't fire immediately. For 30 seconds, then a full minute, she waited. She wasn't looking at the targets. She was watching the world around them, not just seeing it, but feeling it, becoming part of its patterns. She perceived the heat haze shimmering above distant rocks, noticed how a far-off flag fluttered in a rhythm that revealed the wind's underlying structure, sensed the subtle changes in air pressure that signaled shifting currents. Then, for a sliver of a second that no one else perceived, the chaos subsided. A pocket of calm formed, a perfect, fleeting corridor of still air between her position and the target complex. In a single, seamless motion too fast to properly track, she fired 7 rounds in rapid succession. The shots came so quickly, they sounded like a single violent tear in the fabric of reality. Crack, 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 crack. A deafening silence fell over the range, broken seconds later by the distant metallic reports of impacts. Ping, 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 ping. Through the spotting scopes, an impossible scene unfolded. The primary target was down. 2 guard positions on elevated platforms were eliminated. A moving vehicle target, struck through the windshield, had stopped dead. A sniper in a concealed position that none of the SEALs had even spotted was neutralized. A communications antenna was severed, and the final shot had detonated a simulated explosive charge in a puff of red smoke. An entire enemy command structure eliminated by a single shooter in less than 3 seconds. Morgan's jaw went slack, his face a canvas of disbelief. "No," he whispered, the sound stolen by the wind. "That's not possible. Nobody shoots like that." Colonel Steele walked forward, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He moved with calm deliberateness, his eyes fixed on the stunned lieutenant commander. "Mr. Morgan," Steele's voice was dangerously quiet, yet carried absolute authority. "You're about to learn a very important lesson about making assumptions." He turned to his aide, a young ensign who was staring at Emily with undisguised awe. "Ensign Williams, please read Chief Carter's service record. Unclassified portions only." Williams' hands trembled as he accessed his tablet. Name: Emily Carter. Rank: Chief Warrant Officer 5. Several SEALs blinked in recognition. CW5 was the military's highest warrant officer rank, reserved for technical masters of their craft. Unit assignments: classified, formally attached to Joint Special Operations Command task forces. Williams paused, swallowing hard. Combat deployments: 22. Combat hours: over 5,000. The SEALs stared, their arrogance melting into cold shock. Primary specialty, Williams continued, his voice now ringing with reverence. Special Operations Target Interdiction. Secondary specialty, Advanced Marksmanship Instructor, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. DevGru, SEAL Team 6, the best of the best. Awards include, Williams's voice cracked, the Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor Device, and the Distinguished Service Cross. He looked up from the tablet, his eyes wide. "Sir, there's a note from the Secretary of Defense. It says she holds the standing record for longest confirmed elimination in a combat zone. The distance is classified." A profound silence settled over the range like a physical weight, crushing egos and rearranging worldviews. Colonel Steele let the silence work its magic before speaking again, his voice now a sharp blade directed at Morgan. "Lieutenant Commander, the reason you found this exercise so difficult is because Chief Carter designed it 15 years ago. She wrote the manual." The reason the win seems impossible is because she chose this exact firing point at this exact time of year to teach operators like you to see beyond the numbers on your instruments. He gestured to the old rifle now resting on its bipod. That M110 is the same weapon she used on a moonless night in the Hindu Kush to dismantle an enemy command cell from over 2,800 meters away. To you, it's a museum piece. To her, it's an extension of her will. Colonel Steele turned his back on the humiliated SEALs and faced Emily directly. He drew himself to his full height and executed a slow, deliberate salute. Not the quick, perfunctory gesture of superior to subordinate, but the deep, reverent salute reserved for heroes. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion that transcended military courtesy, "my apologies for the ignorance displayed here today. I assure you it will be corrected." Master Sergeant Lawson, seeing the colonel's salute, instantly snapped to attention and rendered his own. Then, one by one, like dominoes of humility, the young, arrogant SEALs followed. They stood stiffly, their hands raised to their brows, their faces a mixture of shame and awe. They were no longer saluting an administrative officer. They were saluting a ghost made flesh, a legend who had stepped out of whispered stories to remind them what true mastery looked like. The story spread faster than wildfire through the tight-knit special operations community. Before the brass casings from Emily's rifle had cooled, the legend of the Ghost of Pendleton was being whispered in barracks, texted between forward operating bases, and spoken of in reverent tones in the bars where operators gathered. Lieutenant Commander Morgan's hubris became the central pillar of a cautionary tale. The phrase, "don't get Cartered," quickly entered the special operations lexicon, a direct warning against the lethal combination of arrogance and assumption. The next morning at 04:45, Morgan stood outside the nondescript administrative building where Emily worked. The pre-dawn air was heavy with salt and marine layer fog, creating an appropriately somber atmosphere for his mission of atonement. When Emily emerged precisely at 0500, Morgan blocked her path. There were no excuses, no justifications. He simply stood at attention and delivered a formal, sincere apology for his words, his attitude, and his profound lack of respect. Then, in the ultimate act of surrender, he asked for her mentorship. Emily studied the humbled officer in the dim light, seeing something she hadn't expected, genuine remorse and a hunger to learn that went beyond mere career advancement. "Be on the range at 0530, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "And be ready to listen to the wind." 3 weeks later, the advanced marksmanship program had evolved beyond simple target shooting into something approaching philosophy. Emily's methods challenged every assumption the SEALs had about their profession, forcing them to confront the difference between technical competence and true mastery. "Distance isn't just about physics," Emily explained to her newest class, pacing slowly before the assembled operators. "It's about patience, about reading the entire environment between you and your objective. Sometimes the hardest targets aren't the farthest away, they're the ones hiding in plain sight." The students listened with an intensity that bordered on worship. Word of Emily's capabilities had spread throughout the special operations community, creating a waiting list for her training that stretched across multiple commands. But success bred scrutiny, and scrutiny brought visitors. The black SUV with government plates pulled up to the range as Emily concluded the morning's training session. 3 figures emerged, 2 men in expensive suits and a woman whose bearing suggested intelligence work. "Chief Carter," the woman said as she approached, her smile polite but predatory. "I'm Deputy Director Sarah Chen from the Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to discuss your current activities." Emily recognized the type immediately. Bureaucrats who viewed operators as assets to be managed rather than people to be respected. "I'm conducting authorized training under Colonel Steele's direct supervision," Emily replied carefully. "Yes, about that," Chen continued, consulting a tablet. "Your methods have achieved remarkable results. Qualification scores have improved by 43% in just 3 weeks. That's unprecedented." "Good training tends to produce good results," Emily said dryly. Chen's smile tightened. "The Pentagon is very interested in formalizing your techniques into a service-wide program, with you as the program director, of course. The offer was wrapped in flattery, but Emily understood the subtext. They wanted to take her off the operational side permanently, make her an administrator, a figurehead for a program they would ultimately control. I appreciate the interest, Emily said diplomatically, but I'm quite satisfied with my current role. I'm afraid satisfaction isn't really the issue here, Chen replied, her tone sharpening. This is about national security and the optimal utilization of unique assets. Before Emily could respond, Master Sergeant Lawson approached from the range house, his expression darker than she'd seen since their first meeting. Chief, he said quietly, we have a problem. Intel just came in about a situation developing overseas. Special operations team pinned down, requesting immediate sniper support. Chen's eyes narrowed. This conversation isn't over, Chief Carter. Actually, came a new voice, it is. Colonel Steele approached the group, his demeanor suggesting he'd been listening to more of the conversation than Chen realized. Deputy Director, he said with cold politeness, Chief Carter is currently assigned to my command for operational duties that supersede any administrative programs you might be developing. Chen's composure cracked slightly. Colonel, you're interfering with a Pentagon-level initiative. I'm protecting a valuable asset from bureaucratic mismanagement, Steele replied flatly. Unless you have direct orders from the Secretary of Defense, I suggest you coordinate any future requests through proper channels. The standoff lasted several seconds before Chen gathered her composure and signaled her team to withdraw. But her parting look promised that this was far from over. After the DIA team departed, Steele turned to Emily with an expression of grim satisfaction. That bought us some time, he said, but they'll be back. People like that don't give up easily. What's this about an overseas situation? Emily asked. Steele's expression grew serious. It's real. And it's bad. 7-man SEAL team conducting a hostage rescue in Somalia. They walked into an ambush, and now they're trapped in a compound with no clear extraction route. What kind of support are they requesting? The kind that only exists in classified files and whispered legends, Steele replied. They need someone who can make impossible shots under impossible conditions. Emily felt a familiar stirring in her chest, the call to action that had defined her life for 3 decades. How long do I have to get ready? Transport leaves in 4 hours, Steele said. But Emily, this isn't officially sanctioned. If things go wrong, the government will deny any knowledge of your involvement. Emily smiled grimly, the expression transforming her from instructor back into the predator she'd always been. Colonel, she said, I've been operating without official sanction for most of my career. It's never stopped me from doing what's right. Somalia, 18 hours later, the helicopter touched down 2 miles from the target compound as dawn broke over the Horn of Africa. Emily emerged into the stifling heat, her equipment carefully selected for the mission ahead. A custom M110 with specialized optics, enough ammunition for an extended engagement, and communication gear that would allow her to coordinate with the trapped SEAL team. The terrain was hostile in every sense. Rocky hills providing natural sniper positions, but also countless places for enemy fighters to hide. Intelligence suggested the compound was surrounded by at least 30 militants, all armed with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. Emily established her position on a ridgeline 1,800 meters from the target building. Through her high-powered scope, she could see the desperate situation unfolding below. The SEAL team had barricaded themselves in the compound's main building, but enemy forces were steadily closing the noose. Her radio crackled with the voice of the team leader, Lieutenant Marcus Webb. Overwatch, this is Bravo team. We're running low on ammunition and medical supplies. Request immediate fire support. Bravo team, this is Guardian Angel, Emily replied, using the call sign she'd adopted for this mission. I have eyes on your position. Identifying targets now. What followed was a masterclass in precision shooting under combat conditions. Emily systematically eliminated the enemy's key weapons positions, machine gun nests, sniper hides, RPG teams, with surgical accuracy that demoralized the attackers and gave the trapped SEALs room to maneuver. Each shot required complete recalculation of environmental factors. The African heat created complex air currents that shifted constantly throughout the day. Wind patterns changed every few minutes as thermal differences created micro-weather systems across the valley. But Emily had transcended the limitations of technology and technique. She had become something more elemental, a force of nature that imposed order on chaos through pure will and decades of accumulated skill. "Guardian Angel," came Webb's voice over the radio. "You just saved 7 American lives. How copy?" "Copy that, Bravo team," Emily replied. "All in a day's work." The extraction helicopter arrived 30 minutes later, pulling out the SEAL team under cover of Emily's protective fire. By the time she reached her own extraction point, the compound was silent, and the enemy force had melted away into the surrounding countryside. On the flight back to the naval base, Emily reflected on the mission's larger implications. The DIA wouldn't give up their attempts to bureaucratize her skills. The Pentagon would continue trying to fit her into organizational charts that couldn't contain what she represented. But sometimes the most important battles weren't fought against foreign enemies. Sometimes they were fought against the institutional forces that threatened to reduce warriors to widgets, legends to footnotes in policy manuals. Emily Carter had spent 30 years proving that some things couldn't be quantified, systematized, or bureaucratized. Excellence was personal. Mastery was individual. And sometimes the ghost in the machine was the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. 2 months later, Naval Special Warfare Training Center, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morgan stood before a new class of sniper candidates, his bearing transformed by months of intensive training under Emily's guidance. Gone was the swaggering arrogance, replaced by the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to listen before speaking, to observe before acting. "Before we begin today's exercise," he said to the assembled students, "I want to tell you about something we call the Carter Doctrine." He gestured to a display case on the wall containing 7 spent brass casings arranged in a precise pattern, with a brass plaque beneath reading, "Competence is silent. Respect is earned." 6 months ago, Morgan continued, this range was the site of an extraordinary demonstration by one of the finest shooters our nation has ever produced. Chief Warrant Officer Emily Carter, operating from this firing line, executed 7 precision shots in under 3 seconds, neutralizing an entire simulated enemy command structure at extreme range in variable wind conditions. He paced slowly before the class, his manner earnest rather than performative. But the Carter Doctrine isn't about marksmanship alone. It's about integration, the fusion of technology and human intuition, of science and art, of physical skill and moral judgment. Morgan paused, making eye contact with each student. "You've been selected for this program because you've demonstrated exceptional technical proficiency. But to become truly elite, you must develop something more elusive, the ability to see beyond the data, to sense what others miss, to make the impossible shot not through luck, but through perfect harmony of skill, awareness, and discipline. One of I." The students raised her hand. "Sir, will we get to meet Chief Carter?" Morgan's expression grew more serious. "Chief Carter is currently serving in a classified capacity that prevents her direct involvement with this course, but her methods, her philosophy, and her standards are now permanently integrated into our training protocols." What he didn't say, what he couldn't say due to security classifications, was that Emily was now heading a small elite unit tasked with handling threats that conventional forces couldn't address, the kind of problems that required surgical precision and complete deniability. "The Carter Doctrine has 3 core principles," Morgan continued. "First, technology serves the operator, not the reverse. Second, perception exceeds calculation. Third, the moral dimension of a mission is as critical as its tactical execution." As the students filed out to the range, Morgan lingered by the display case containing the 7 brass casings. His phone buzzed with a text from an unlisted number. "How's the new class?" He smiled, typing back, "Promising, but they're not you." The reply came immediately. "They don't need to be me. They just need to be better than they thought possible." Morgan pocketed his phone and followed his students outside, where the California sun cast long shadows across the Pendleton firing range. The wind was picking up, creating complex patterns across the distant targets, exactly the conditions the Carter Doctrine was designed to master. Somewhere in the world, Emily Carter was still out there, still protecting the nation that had created her, still embodying the principles her father had instilled decades ago in the Montana wilderness. But she was no longer alone. She had created something that would outlast her, a methodology, a philosophy, a way of approaching not just marksmanship, but the entire concept of professional excellence. The Carter Doctrine wasn't just a training program. It was a revolution wrapped in the guise of evolution, proof that sometimes the most important victories were won not on distant battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of those who would carry the mission forward. The Ghost had become a standard, and the standard would endure long after the legend passed into history. In the end, that was perhaps Emily Carter's greatest shot of all. Not the impossible 7-round sequence that had humbled the arrogant, but the patient work of transforming an institution from within. One student at a time, one lesson at a time, one moment of hard-earned respect at a time. The desert wind carried the sound of rifle fire across the range, as the next generation of warriors learned to listen to voices their predecessors had never heard. The whispered secrets of wind and distance, patience and precision, honor and humility. And somewhere in that wind, if you knew how to listen, you could still hear the echo of Emily Carter's voice. Competence is silent, respect is earned. The ghost never truly dies. It just finds new shadows to haunt.